In this video, I'll talk about how a student such as yourself can develop and begin writing about your research topic. This video is broken into two parts. In part one, I'll talk about how you can initially choose and develop your topic, and in part two, I'll talk about how you can begin writing about your research topic, and in particular, I'll be discussing the first major assignment for this course, which is the annotated bibliography. So part one, how can I develop my research topic? Well, first, just some terminology I want you to be familiar with that may help you decide on your research topic. There's something called applied research, and then there's something called basic research. And it might be easiest to start right at the bottom of this table here. So applied research has results that often have a direct application to practitioners. So if you're one of the students who often take this course who is interested in going into applied practice of some sort, whether it's sports psychology or strength and conditioning, athletic training, something of that nature, you may gravitate more towards an applied research project. A basic research project, on the other hand, may have results that don't have a direct application in the field. Maybe it's just new knowledge it's unclear how exactly it's useful right away, but maybe later on it could contribute to something more practical, more applied. So applied research answers immediately relevant questions. It almost always has human subjects, at least in the fields that I typically teach in this course. It's often done in a real-world setting, and sometimes it lacks scientific control. And these basically the wording on this table, these are extremes, right? Applied research kind of has some extremes, and basic research has these other extremes. More than likely, each of these rows, you'll fall somewhere in between on the continuum. So we'll talk more about scientific control later in the course. You may not know what that means at this point, and that's fine. But basic research deals more with theoretical issues, not as practical, more theoretical. It's more likely to have animal subjects in some fields, but not necessarily in your field. You'll probably still have human subjects either way, whether you're doing applied or basic research. Basic research is more often done in a laboratory setting instead of a real-world setting. And it's more likely to have careful scientific control. Again, you'll learn more about that later in the semester. And as I said before, its results may lack direct application. So that's just some sort of terminology definitions to know, and that may guide you as you decide on your research topic. Some suggestions for selecting a research topic. One thing that I would recommend is just thinking about something that really interests you, that you really enjoyed when you took a course or when you read something in either a textbook or a journal article, just something that struck you as really interesting. You could also think back to when you first decided to go to graduate school, and what career aspirations do you have, and what's a topic that would be useful to you to have some real expertise on. So you're going to spend a lot of time reading about and writing about your topic. Third suggestion, talk to an advisor, so a faculty member. Is there an ongoing research project you can get involved with, or just do they have any ideas for things that they're interested in, that they think that you might be excited about? Now I'll talk to you about some criteria for selecting a research problem. There are 4 of them, 2 on this slide and 2 on the next. First one is feasibility. Feasibility deals with whether your idea is even possible to do. So for example, maybe you really want to study elite rugby players. Well, do you have access to those people? Are you going to have to travel to another part of the country or another part of the world in order to do that study? And if so, do you have the resources and time and money in order to do that? So feasibility is, Is your idea within the limits and range of your resources, time constraints, and abilities? Do you have access to the necessary participants? Are the required methods manageable and understandable? So you might come up with some really cool, complicated idea, but do you know enough about that in order to make it work? Critical mass is the problem of sufficient magnitude and scope to fulfill the requirement that motivated the study. So that are there enough variables, enough potential results, enough substance to write about? And this is going to vary depending on whether you're doing an independent study or thesis. So critical mass is basically just like, is your idea rich enough that it's going to result in a project that is adequate for a thesis project or an independent study or a dissertation, whatever the case may be for your program. Interest. Are you interested in the problem and potential outcome? Does it relate to your background, field of study, career goals? Are you still going to like the topic after spending hundreds of hours on it? So certainly you want to come up with something feasible, something that's big enough in terms of critical mass. But more than anything, you want to be interested in it yourself. You don't want to get tired of working on it. And theoretical value. Does the problem fill a gap in the literature? So again, one of the things we're working on in this class is writing a review of literature. Part of the reason you do that is to identify the gap in the literature that your study is going to address. Do others recognize its importance? Does it contribute to the advancement of your field? Does it improve the state of the art, quote unquote? And is it maybe going to be something that you can publish, which is certainly a consideration to make if you think you might later want to study for a PhD. When all else fails, remember that research, although it is a step-by-step process like I've talked about, it happens in a cycle. So one thing I didn't point out when I first showed this figure from Thomas and Nelson is kind of this feedback loop where after you finish the study, basically based on your discussion of what were the study outcomes and what is still needed for next steps in research, you kind of cycle back to the beginning and you start again with a new problem that's related, but it addresses a new gap in the literature. So you can use that to your advantage because in research articles, there's always going to be a discussion section in which researchers give suggestions for further research. So you can read articles that are interesting to you and figure out like what are the researchers who know a lot about this topic, what are they saying is important for future researchers or just future studies to look at in terms of that topic. And that brings me to the second part of the video, which is how can I begin writing about my research topic? And as I said before, I'm going to talk specifically about the first major writing assignment, which is the annotated bibliography. I will be providing details, so basically instructions and guidelines and a rubric, also student examples and a template for you to follow, all on Brightspace. I highly encourage you to go and find those things and download them and look at them and use them. That is actually one of the most positive pieces of feedback I've gotten from former students is the resources that I've provided that help with completing the major writing assignments. So definitely go and find those. I'll probably point you to them in class as well and show you some of those as well. But basically what you're going to be doing is you're going to be finding a bunch of sources, but you're going to be summarizing 3 of them. So 3 journal articles where you're going to summarize the purpose, participants, variables examined, procedures and or measuring instruments used, and key findings of each of those 3 studies. You're going to do that. You're going to summarize them in your own words. We're going to talk about how to do this. We're going to practice it in class as well. So you're not totally on your own with this, but I just want you to know kind of what this is going to involve. So you're going to basically summarize 3 articles for each of those headings, and then you're going to write an annotation. how will the article be useful in your paper? So let me talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. So you're going to start with the APA format citation, the reference. So this just gives an example. So you have the author's last name, first initial, last name, first initial, the year in which it was published, and again, this follows the specific format in terms of commas and parentheses and everything, so you need to really focus on these details. One of the required textbooks for this course is the APA Publication Manual. That will go into a lot of detail about how to write these citations in APA format, whether it's a book or a book chapter or a journal article. For the most part, you're going to be using journal articles, which is what you're seeing on the screen here. So after the year is the article title, Advancements to the Understanding of Expert Visual Anticipation in Striking Sports. And then the journal title, which is the Canadian Journal of Behavioral Science. Notice that that's in italics. And then the journal volume, 49, also in italics. And the issue number in parentheses. And then the page numbers. And this is actually incomplete. It should say like 262 through 272 or whatever the pages are. So beyond the reference, so that's the first thing you'll put, and then you're going to go through each of the headings I talked about, starting with the purpose. So in your own words, what's the purpose of the research study? Often you can find that information in the abstract of the study or the introduction section. So authors will actually state the purpose very clearly. You do need to put it in your own words, so don't quote the article. Please use paraphrasing. That's something you need to work on often in this course. Just practice that, paraphrase instead of using quotes as much as you can. And also just be aware that some authors, instead of calling it the purpose of the study, they'll just talk about their hypothesis. That's also something that you can use to talk about the purpose of the study, kind of what was their hypothesis, what was their expected outcome of the study. Participants. So what were the specific characteristics of participants? And that's you especially need to give details about that if the characteristics of the participants are central to the study. For example, if you have Olympic level athletes, that's important to point out. We're not just talking about amateurs, high school players, something like that. We're talking about Olympians. So you'd want to give as much detail as you think is important, depending on how special that population was to the study. The variables examined. So what's the independent variable? What's the dependent variable? We'll learn those definitions in this course. And what was used to measure or test those variables. Give some details about like what they were measuring and how it was scored, what were the units of measurement, etc. And was the instrument that they used the best available instrument? Or if not, what were its limitations in comparison to some other possibilities? Procedures and or measuring instruments used. So describe the methods used in the research study. What were the sort of step-by-step procedures they used? You don't have to go into a huge amount of detail here. Try your best to pick out the key points, the key details, and put those in your summary. You can refer back to participant groups and the tests you talked about in the earlier sections. As you've already described them, you don't need to repeat those details here. You can just name them and keep talking about them. And then the key findings. So describe the key findings and conclusion statements from the research study. Again, try not to quote the article, because certainly authors will talk in clear language about their research findings, but you need to practice paraphrasing it and putting it in your own words. And then after you've summarized the article, you're going to write an annotation. This is basically a note to self. You're telling yourself, what is the overall usefulness of the article to you? How does the information from the study help to provide background for your research question? How do you plan to use the article? Where do you plan to put it in your review of literature? And the goal here is to make it easy to remember why you chose the source and how it's relevant to your research topics. Basically, again, this is a note to self, a reminder, oh, this is why this article is useful to me. This is how I plan to use it in my paper. So before I move on to words of wisdom, just wanted to make a couple more points about the annotated bibliography. So again, there's going to be resources and details you can read more about posted on Brightspace. But basically, you're doing 3 article summaries and annotations, and then you're providing a bibliography list of those 3, as well as at least 7 other articles that are relevant to your topic. So your first task is to search and find at least 10 articles, journal articles from scholarly journals, and create a bibliography list. Pick out 3 of those that you'd like to immediately summarize and write annotations on, and that's what you're going to include in your first assignment. And in the next session, we'll learn about the major different types of research studies, so that will help you to start to read about research. And in a couple sessions, we're going to learn about how you can use the library's resources here at Springfield College, and how you can use our databases to find the articles that you're going to need to use in your first assignment in the annotated bibliography. So some final words of wisdom: take pride in your work. Know that this is more than just a paper. This first assignment, the annotated bibliography, is just a first step towards your review of literature, which is the last assignment that you'll submit in this course. But lucky for you, it doesn't end there. It's not just like a regular paper that you do for a course where you get a grade on it and then you kind of leave it on your hard drive and that's the end of it. This is something you're going to carry on to later courses that you take here. For example, proposal design. You're actually going to get to use this assignment again, and it's going to inform your research study. So you do want to go to some effort to pick a topic that you really think you're going to find interesting and that you're going to stick with. So see these assignments as opportunities. You're basically getting a head start, and you're getting multiple rounds of feedback from myself and my teaching fellow. Be sure to leave time for proofreading. Use the spell check and the grammar check function on your computer. Just remember that spell check's not perfect. So for example, trails, if you meant to say trials, it's not going to detect trails because obviously that's a correctly spelled word. Grammar check can usually pick up on some of these problems. And try to find someone else who's willing to proofread your paper. Maybe you can return the favor and proofread their paper. It's always helpful to have a fresh set of eyes. If you just proofread your own paper, the more you kind of look at your paper, the less likely you're going to actually catch these little typos and errors. So have someone else look at it. That's all for this video. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.